This is Jane Durand. I'm at Edwina Corlette Gallery. I'm going to give you a walkthrough of my exhibition, and you can type questions as I go if you have any, and Prue, who is behind the camera, will ask the questions to me and hopefully I can answer them for you. I'm going to just start with this little group over here that is in the window of the gallery. I've got 3 pieces. There's this one, which is a little museum jar. It's the smallest piece in the exhibition, and I've made it with a group of red-browed finches that are sitting in some grasses. I made this one because when I go walking my dogs, which I do very regularly, I walk near a river near where I live, and there are lots and lots of these little red-browed finches that fly around and play in the grasses, and so that's like what I love to watch. Then I've got this piece, which is in a larger museum jar. This one is based on a drawing by Ferdinand Bauer, who was a botanical artist in the early 1800s, and he did lots of drawings of Australian flora and fauna, and he did an illustration of a clay wattle. Sometimes it's called a clay wattle, and sometimes when I've looked it up it's called a winged wattle. It's also got a scientific name, and it's such an interesting wattle plant. It's not a tree, it's more like a shrub, and it's got very interesting leaf structure. And I love the illustration that Ferdinand Bauer made. I'm really fascinated by illustrations of the early explorers and the early naturalists who came to Australia in the late 1700s and early 1800s. And this one I paired up with some regent honey eaters. The regent honey eaters are made based on an illustration of another artist called James Sobey, and he worked in 1794 and thereabouts, and he did some really interesting bird illustrations that I found. So the regent honey eaters are based on his illustrations, and that's that piece. So they are sitting in the museum jar. This one here is another one of my the birds that I've seen on my daily walks, and it's the magpie. I have a great relationship with the magpies that live on the verge outside my home, and I chat to them every day. And this guy is sitting in some grass, and he's surrounded by a kangaroo paw flower. On my way to my studio, I do drive past a place where there are plenty of these kangaroo paw flowers, which aren't usual in Brisbane, but they've been planted along this route, and there's often a magpie strutting around in amongst them. I don't suppose anybody's got any questions to ask yet?
Not yet, but Jane Guthladen does say that she loves the magpie.
Oh, that's good. People either love or hate magpies. I love magpies. I have to chat to them. Whenever I see a magpie, I have to have a conversation with one because they're really clever. So I can move along to the next piece. This one here is a large bell jar, and inside it's got a very complex flower. It's a Banksia flower. It's not your common Banksia that people would normally think about when you think of Banksia. There are a huge variety of Banksia flowers, and I love Banksia, so I've gone to the Botanical Gardens library and taken out hundreds of books on all the different species of Banksia that you can get. And this one is a pteridifolia Banksia, and to me it looks very similar to the protea flower, which is native to South Africa, where I come from. So I really love the shape and the form of this Banksia, and I also loved its leaf, the leaves of this plant. So I've made this really emphasizing the leaves, and I've paired it with some little chestnut breasted mannequins. And these guys are also little birds that I very often see on my walks with my dogs. And they're beautiful little birds. And in fact, the other day I found one trapped in a spider's web, and I took it off, and it lay in my hand, and they're tiny little birds, and it was just the size of my hand, this little beautiful little mannequin.
So we have a question, Jane.
Yes.
From Riley Sharp, which plant do you enjoy making the most?
Well, I've probably made proteas and South African fynbos plants the most, which are a range of plants that are really beautiful, and included in that are aloes and proteas and succulent kind of flowers. But since I've moved to Australia, I've made lots and lots of banksias, and I love making banksias very much. So I guess banksia is probably one of my favorite plants to make.
And Julia Hegarty says, how long would it take you to complete a project?
It depends on the project, Julia. This particular piece here took me quite a while because it took ages to make each of the leaves. So I guess it took me about a day for each leaf, if I include making them and painting them.
And are these hand-built or used with moulds? Jade is asking.
They're all hand-built. So all the pieces here are hand-built. So each little bird takes me about a day. So I make it out of clay and mold it and then carve it and add features to it and that kind of thing.
And so Chrisabel has asked, how do they fire without breaking in the kiln?
They do break sometimes. And then I've got to make them again. So I have to be really, really careful. And sometimes I make special trays in inverted commas. I make sort of platforms for them out of clay as well while I'm making them. So that when I pick them up and put them in the kiln and then take them out again, I don't have to handle the piece. I can handle the platform that I've made, if that makes any sense. So it's just working through processes. So I started off breaking a lot, and now I've worked out systems so that I don't need to break so much anymore.
And Julia also asks, do you sketch your ideas first, or are you inspired to create based on your natural environments?
A little bit of both. So some of the works that are here on this exhibition, I did some detailed drawings for. When I didn't have a chance to go on a farm break Christmas time, and I spent a week walking and looking in the bush and then going back and drawing in a sketchbook. So I did quite a few sketches for these pieces. When I work on big commissions, I most certainly do drawings first. But there are times when I just make things based on what I've seen without sketching them.
Betsy Stoltz asks, hi Jane, can you say something about how your way of seeing changed when you came to Australia?
So I think when I did come to Australia, I made a very, very determined effort to try and understand the natural environment that I am now in. Initially, when I first moved to Australia, I felt very depressed because I was very connected to my natural environment in South Africa, and I thought, how am I ever going to connect to this land and have that real sense that I belong? And so, as a coping device, I started doing a lot of bushwalking, and then began to really, really look at trying to connect with the native plants and the native birds, and learn about them and learn what they are called and read about them. And the more I walked and saw things and then looked them up in books and became familiar with them, the more I've connected with them. And now I feel a really strong connection to the Australian flora and fauna, and it has helped me greatly with a feeling of belonging in this place. And so the work that I make is important for me. It's important for me to make this work that's based on the Australian, the natural environment, because it's my way of being able to belong in this land.
Kaylin asks, do you have a favourite piece in this collection, and if so, why?
I have a few favourite pieces. So one of my favourite pieces is the aloe. I like this piece because it grew out of I thought that in this show I wanted to do something that was based on my roots, because of all the other pieces are based on Australian flora and fauna, and this one is based on memory of my childhood when I grew up. We always had an aloe garden in our garden because there's so many different types of aloe plants, and my grandmother was a great gardener, and we always had a patch in the garden that was probably north facing and very sunny, that we had all different types of aloes growing in. And my favourite thing to do during my school holidays was to sit in the aloe garden and draw the aloes. I had hundreds of drawings of aloes, and while I sat there were always skinks that would come and sit on the rocks next to me in the sun. And so I have lovely memories of sitting in the aloe garden with the skinks. So I made this piece as a memory of that. And I liked playing with the museum jar and having the idea of some things being contained within the jar and some things escaping out of the jar. And this seemed to work really well. Another favourite was the piece that's in the corner of the gallery, which is the musk lorikeets in the eucalyptus tree. And this one, this was just a beautiful moment when I went on a walk over Christmas time. I was staying on a farm that had been ravaged by the bushfires, and the whole area was just burnt, and all the trees were just black and orange. There was just black and orange everywhere, and there was a hill where one eucalyptus tree had survived, and it was green and had beautiful flowers and was covered in birds. And I thought they were just ordinary rainbow lorikeets, and I went closer and had a look, and these lorikeets weren't one bit worried about me, so I got really close, and they were these musk lorikeets, and it was the first time I'd seen musk lorikeets, so I had to look them up in the bird book and read about them. So this is my memory of walking on this farm and this one beautiful tree that survived the fire and all the musk lorikeets that came to feast. And I love these museum jars because they offer such a lovely way of working with the sculpture. You can work inside and outside of them. So this one is captured in its own little world in the jar, and this one is escaping out of it.
Let's talk about the mosaic element of the sculpture, Jane.
Okay, so some of the bell jar pieces are on mosaic vases, and the mosaic on this particular piece is inside. If you look, you can't really see it through the photographs, I don't think, but the inside has mosaics that are talking to the leaf forms, and then I've got a row of gold mosaic which is reflecting up onto the leaves of the plant. I like the way that the reflections from the mosaic shine onto the glazed ceramic because it just gives it another dimension. And then the outside of it I've done a kind of a stylized feather shape at the bottom with the colouring of the chestnut-breasted mannequins to have some kind of a connection with those birds. And I like the patterning of the mosaic and how you can stylize the patterns from the natural forms and make them part of the work.
Christabel asks, are the pieces whole or collated together?
Most of the time they are collated. So this piece, for example, I made the flower whole, and then I've made the leaves, and then I've made the birds, and I've put them together. So a large portion of my working life over the last 25 years has been doing mosaic and ceramic installations on buildings and big wall installations or floor installations, and that has been all about collating pieces, so taking found pieces and making pieces and putting them together and sticking them together to create an artwork. And so I've just continued that approach with my sculptural work, so that I make elements and make pieces and then I put them together.
Debbie asks, have you always been inspired by the natural environment?
Yes, I have. I think I'm happiest when I am out in nature, and it's just an endless source of inspiration, and I can't imagine ever running out of inspiration if you go out into the world that's around you and look. It's always been a great source of inspiration for me.
Jade asks, have you studied anywhere or are you self-taught?
I did study. I started off studying at Cape Town University doing fine art at the Michaela School of Art in South Africa, and then I didn't finish that because I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to be an artist while I was doing that, because I think I was very young, straight out of school, and I changed course and went to study architecture, which I completed. So I did a Bachelor of Architecture. I then did a postgraduate diploma in architecture, and I registered as an architect and worked a little bit as an architect and thought, what am I doing? I don't want to do this, I want to do art. And so I went back to art. While I studied architecture, though, I did join a pottery class with a woman who ran a very old-fashioned, traditionalist, wheel-throwing pottery studio, where I think there was a blue glaze and a brown glaze, and that was it. But she was very rigid in proper technique, and so I learned a great deal about working with clay from her.
Alexandra said something nice. She said, I love how the scale of these works has grown from the earlier ones you made. Jane, would you like to talk about what's influenced you to create larger works?
I think that I don't know. I think that I just got more and more excited about the possibilities of this way of working, and initially I was able to find some small glass containers and use those, and since I really enjoyed working that way, it made me look further to try and see what I could find in terms of the containers. So now I've done lots of Googling and looking, and I've managed to find these amazing large glass museum jars and these big bell jars, which are fantastic, and it just opens up a whole lot of new possibilities.
Someone's asked, why did you decide to work with these glass domes? Was it an aesthetic or conceptual decision?
It was because I wanted to try and create a little world for the pieces inside, and also because I'm very inspired by the illustrations and drawings of the naturalists who, in the early colonizers of Australia, and around the late 1700s and the early 1800s, there was a great movement of people discovering the natural world and recording it and doing drawings and illustrations, and it's very and it's a way of preserving something. So because I'm often basing my work on those types of museum type drawings, I wanted to also create the feeling that this was now captured in time, and this is a way of preserving this this moment of this piece existing. So I'm probably talking over you. It's preserved in its house and it's in its own world, and it has some kind of a link to the idea of preservation and a museum piece and recording something.
That reminds me, if we go over to this sculptural piece, we can talk about how you exaggerate and change certain elements and why you do that of the birds and the flora and fauna.
Okay. Yes, that's a very good point, because this particular piece is based on a drawing that I found by an artist called James Selby, and it's a drawing of a ground parrot that he did in 1794. And when I've been reading a lot about how these artists went about doing their work, they very often would go out in the field and shoot the bird and then have it taxidermied and then set it up in their studio in order to illustrate it. And the way they would set up their birds and the creatures that they were going to illustrate was very often not how you would see these creatures in the wild. So this one, which is a ground parrot, is set up like this because this is how it was illustrated. But if you look at ground parrots in the wild and photographs of them, they don't sit like this generally. But I can see why this artist did set it up like this, because it allowed for such a wonderful view of all its patterns. I mean, they've got beautiful patterns in the feathers and the tail feathers, and so this way of setting up this bird allows for that. And in this particular one, I've really exaggerated the native grasses as well, because I went on a walk the other day and I spotted a grass like that and I thought, oh, here it is, but it's very exaggerated in my work, but they're beautiful. And often I think if you exaggerate something, you can see how beautiful it is, and then maybe if you go for a walk one day and you see that grass, you go, oh, that was the grass, and you can really appreciate it much more. It's also because often when you go on a walk and you see something, or if you have an experience, you can tell it to somebody else how you want to. So, for example, the early explorers, they would be taking these images back to England with them and showing people who'd never been to Australia, and they could present these birds however they wanted to, because that's how they saw them in their minds. So when I do my pieces, I can present them how I want to, because this is how I see them in my mind. So my aloe and its roots, for example, I think I've exaggerated the scale of the skink and the roots and the different parts of it, because this is from a memory. So it's almost like when you go on a bushwalk and you spot a snake and you come back and tell everyone, oh, we saw a snake, and it will suddenly become 5 meters long instead of a meter long when you saw it on the pathway. So it's kind of that response as well.
Someone said, your work reminds me of the botanical drawings of Elizabeth Gould and her husband. Does that have any relevance, or is that just...
Yeah, well, I love the work of Elizabeth Gould, and I've read the book recently written about her, and I've studied all of her drawing, her illustrations. Her husband never did any illustrations, even though he's often credited with that. He was just the person who organised the expeditions and shot the birds and taxidermied them and all of that, and wrote about them. They really are incredible. So she's definitely one of the artists that I use as reference and look at.
Riley Sharp has asked, does having a background in architecture influence your works?
I think it does. It influences my general work a lot, so especially the commissions that I do and the big installations on buildings, but I think just a way of thinking and a way of seeing. When I studied architecture, it was a very design-orientated course, and we did a great deal of study in history of art and architecture, and then design theory and design. And so I think I'm quite design orientated and also structurally as well. When I think of building things, I'm always thinking of putting together my pieces and constructing them.
People are making comment about your exhibition alongside the other artist, Jane Guthleben, the paintings that are hanging. They've asked, what sort of discussions did you have together before you created your bodies of work?
That's a great question. It's such a lovely connection. It's a great pairing with Jane Gutleben's paintings. I love her paintings. So Edwina Corlette initially introduced me to Jane Guthleben last year and suggested that we have an exhibition together. And I was thrilled about that idea. And I was in Sydney last year, and I had a lovely visit with Jane in her studio, and we looked at her work and chatted about what we wanted to do for this exhibition, and just naturally the fact that Jane Guthleben also works with a great deal of Australian flora and fauna, and she's also influenced by what's around her in the natural world. So there was a great connection between us. And I love the colourway that Jane uses, and it happened to be the colours that I love using as well in my glazing and my work. So it just felt like a great pairing, and it felt like I didn't have to make too much effort to make work that would live happily alongside these beautiful paintings.
We have Jane live on the comments section. So Jane, if you'd like to say anything, write it down and I'll speak it. Are there any other questions?
No more questions.
Well, they've been great so far.
Yeah.
Jane Guthleben says, we have so many influences in common.
Yes.
Which is true, which is just what you've said.
Yes, we do. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do another exhibition again, perhaps when the world is a little bit more normal again. And I've started having great ideas about more work that I can make, and it would be really great to do this another time.
Yes. Someone's asked, what projects are you working on now?
Right at the moment, I've just finished a project for a school in Brisbane called All Hallows School, which was an installation in a memorial garden that they've just constructed. And I'm also working on a solo exhibition which will be coming up at the end of this year at Ipswich Art Gallery. And it's called Living in Ipswich. And it's quite different from this work. And yeah, I've started working on that.
People have just asked for some close-ups, so I'm just doing a little tour again. So does this wattle plant actually look like this in real life, Jane?
It actually does, because I found, because I looked at the illustrations that were done, and I thought, oh, this plant can't possibly look like that. And then I wanted to find an actual plant, but I asked some nurseries and nobody had one. They are more common in Western Australia, but I did find some photographs on the internet of it, and in the photographs it looks like that. So it does. It's quite a strange plant, but it's really beautiful.
And do the birds which reside in these beautiful little plants, do they exist together in real life?
They do.
Do you find them together, or do you notice a bird first or a plant and then research?
So I might find them together to start with. So for example, the musk lorikeets in the eucalyptus was one where I absolutely found them together. And I've also found the blue-faced honey eaters that I've paired up with that Banksia. I've found those birds like that, or those. But the blue-faced honey eater also loves a range of Australian native plants. It also loves to eat the bottlebrush flowers and all sorts of other things. But I have seen it on the Banksias. Sometimes I find a plant that I love, and then I just do some research and look at what birds enjoy that plant. So it's a bit of both. It's a bit of what I will see. So all of this exhibition is a little bit of a combination of things that I have seen myself, that I have found on my ramblings, and other things that I've found in illustrations.
Jade has asked, are your works low-fired or high-fired?
I generally fire to 1,100 degrees, so I don't, it depends. Sometimes I'll fire up to 1,200. It depends on what the piece is looking like and how I feel it could cope, or how I feel the glaze could cope.
A few people are asking which of these sculptures are available.
So the beautiful wattle is available.
It is lovely, isn't it? This wattle piece, and also to this really terrific work.
The Banksia with the chestnut-breasted mannequins.
Yes, so much detail. And for those who have just joined, do you want to talk again about the beautiful mosaic inside and how it reflects?
So the mosaic inside this one is, there's a patterning that mimics the leaf shape of this particular Banksia, which is a really beautiful leaf shape. And then there's a row of beautiful gold mosaic tiles which reflect onto the glazed ceramics and gives it another dimension with those reflections. And the outside mosaic is a stylized feather pattern in the colouring of the little chestnut-breasted mannequins.
Well, I don't know, there's a few more questions. Maybe we'll just do one or two more, and then...
Okay.
We've been at it for 33 minutes. It's been great.
Yeah.
Such good support and participation. Thank you, everyone. Claudia says, hi Jane, what was your favourite project and why?
My favourite project of all time.
Well, let's talk about this exhibition.
My favourite piece on the exhibition, I've got a few favourites. I do love the aloe piece, and I love the musk lorikeet piece, but I also love the brown parrot, and I love this one. So I'm a bit hopeless at choosing a favourite.
Do you find yourself challenged with some of the plant and bird shapes and patternings in how you represent those forms?
Yes, definitely.
And how do you overcome those? Trial and error?
By trial and error, by making some things that don't work, and I discard them. So it's a lot of experimentation. So often I'll make, this flower, I made the whole flower and threw it on the floor in the studio because I discarded it. So a lot of these are, I had to make so many leaves in order to get the leaves correct. So a lot of it is a lot of trial and error and making lots of things and then finally finding the one that actually works. So I don't just make it and it's there. It's a lot of process and a lot of work.
Well, thank you very much, Jane. We have recorded this, so we might put this on the website. If you've got any other questions, do email us, gallery@edwinacorlette.com, and any inquiries send through. And anything else, Jane?
No, I'd like to thank everybody for participating in the artist talk. Thank you very much.
It's been terrific. Thank you for sharing your time with us and hearing Jane talk. Thank you.